This is the story of American freedom. And thus, victory was won at Yorktown. This did not bring the war to an end. Negotiations would go on for 2 more difficult years. British troops remained stationed at points within the United States. And the boundaries of the new nation had to be confirmed. Numerous points of detail had to be worked out, made even more difficult by the fact that this just wasn't a negotiation between Great Britain and these United States, but also between the allies of the United States who had contributed to the war effort, especially France, Spain, Holland. These were carried out in Paris. The United States was represented by, among others, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. It was assumed by the British diplomats that they were so much more suave, so much more skilled in the arts of diplomacy, that it would be easy to take advantage of these bumbling Americans. Well, once again, the Americans proved to be much more shrewd than the British gave them credit for. There was the question of the boundaries above all. Now, when the war began, you will recall, one of the spark points had been the British proclamation that American settlers not move beyond the Allegheny Mountains. And that was the technical boundary of states like Pennsylvania. The state of Georgia went only to the Oconee River, not even in the middle of the state of Georgia as it exists today. And once again, these frontier areas were promised by the Crown to his Native American allies, who, again, the Indians, had fought in large numbers on his side. The debates went on and on and on, and finally, the Americans, sitting down at length with the British, not formally over the table, but at dinner at night. Much that would get done during these early years of the founding of our country got done at dinners. Many of these men prided themselves on being 2-bottle men. That is to say, they could drink 2 bottles of wine with their meal, and I don't mean these little 3/4 of a liter or whatever they are. These were real big quart bottles of wine, and mix it up with some punch too, and maybe a mug or 2 or 3 of beer. So in these more convivial atmosphere, discussions went on, and the Americans made the clear point, look, we speak a common language. Most of our trade is going to be with you. Much of your trade will be with us. Why should we be enemies? We've declared and won our independence, but we bear no lasting hostility to you. All you need to do is just recognize that our boundaries extend to the Mississippi River. To the Mississippi River? Where is that on a map? There it is, oh boy. Well, that's about double your size. Yes, it is, but what's out there? Nothing. Well, do you know of anything worthwhile out that way? No, of course not. Well, and as for the Indians, well, you know, how much trade are they going to do with you? Let's just look at it practically. We're not talking about justice here, just practical facts. How much trade are they going to do with you? Well, don't you think you should consult your allies? Actually, no. They're going to block it. So why don't we just sign a treaty? Is that all on the up and up? If we do it, it's on the up and up. Well, they did. The Spaniards were outraged. Their empire was in decline, and the last thing they wanted on the borders of their empire, on the other side of the Mississippi, was this vigorous new republic filled with these greedy, land-hungry Americans. But there wasn't much they could do about it. And the Dutch, as long as they got paid, they were happy. And the French just said, so what? And thus it was done. And we gained an empire larger than most nations of Europe through the shrewd diplomacy of our diplomats and through practicality. And as we go through the founding, what most strikes me is the practicality of these men. They knew they had a task to get done. They came from different regions. They had very different points of view on critical issues like slavery. But they set their priorities and worked together. Some were for a bigger, stronger national government. Some were for a limited government. Some were for a Congress with a right to tax. Some were for a Congress that had no right to tax. But they got the job done. And so it was with this treaty. In the meantime, there were tensions in this new republic. And it looked as though this revolution might go the way of other revolutions and end up again in the dustbin of history. That was the view of the wise heads of Europe, thinkers, philosophers, statesmen. There were no functioning republics and democracies in that age of 1783. Surely America would either lapse into anarchy or George Washington would be proclaimed king. Now, you all must remember that's not too far-fetched of an idea. The French Revolution would, 6 years later, take exactly that course. First plunging itself into an excess of democracy, then chaos, and then the emergence of Napoleon, who would crown himself as Emperor of France. And indeed, there was a movement to do just that, to make George Washington king. It spread rapidly among the American troops. 1782, 1783, they had not been paid. The Continental Army, the soldiers that were part of the regular army, their pay was months and months in arrears. Their farms had been foreclosed upon. And still, no real action from the Congress that governed these United States. No payment. Merchants had not been paid. And so there began to circulate in Washington's camp a little letter saying the only salvation is for General Washington to be made king. When Washington got word of this, he came out to his men. He was furious, stone cold in his fury. He had written an address to them, but he couldn't get his glasses to work. Finally, he just said, I have gone gray in my country's service, and now it would seem that I have grown blind. But nothing has ever wounded me so much as the very thought by some of you that I would be king or a dictator, a Julius Caesar. Now, I do not know how I will get it done, but I promise you this, I will get you your pay. And the men cheered him, as history would cheer him. The treaty was signed, And for the next 3 years, the outlook for the country grew bleak, ever bleaker. A financial crisis struck these new United States as severe as the one that struck the United States several years ago, and in which we still suffer. It was a credit crisis that froze up the markets all the way to Boston, froze the credit markets all the way to London, all the way to Amsterdam. It was based on the idea of cheap, easy money instead of hard money, gold and silver. Now, you were a Massachusetts soldier, and you had been paid in what you believed to be good faith by the state of Massachusetts. You had served in its militia with script. Your salary was written down there, how much you were owed, and you thought it was as good as gold or silver. You took it down to your local general store. Now, you had been away for years fighting this war. Your wife had barely been able to keep up the farm. You had to start almost over again. You had to get seed corn, a plow, perhaps oxen. All of this needed to be done. And so you went down to the merchant and he said, I'm not taking this stuff. What? That's script from the state of Massachusetts. I don't care, it's not worth anything. It's utterly worthless. It's issued by the state legislature, yes, but it's worthless. How can that be? Because I cannot sell you anything, because I can't take this piece of worthless paper to the general wholesaler in Worcester and get any money. He won't take it because the bank in Boston won't take it. What do you mean they won't take it? I mean, it's just that. Well, now listen, you just defeated the strongest army in the world. You weren't going to take this lying down the way we take outrageous gas prices. No. You just got that same rifle, formed your militia company again, and you were going to march on Boston. Captain Shay was one of the men who was going to lead you. And so began Shay's rebellion in the fall of 1786. And it began to spread, the idea of it, and men taking up their rifles again, up and down, particularly the frontier of these United States. Well, Shay's rebellion was put down. The merchants in Boston sent out an expeditionary force, but still, there was this grave financial crisis and a deeply discontented American people. Had they fought this revolution to be bankrupt and to see merchants grow fat? It worried men of thought. It deeply worried George Washington. And he said, I fear we're going to go the route of every republic in history and plunge ourselves into chaos. Men like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, representing a slightly younger generation. Alexander Hamilton, you'll recall, had requested permission from General Washington, on whose staff he served, to capture one of the British outposts, the Battle of Yorktown. Madison and Hamilton came together at a small convention that had been called to discuss the problems of commerce on the Chesapeake Bay. Now, several things you must realize. One, these were 13 sovereign, independent states. The treaty with Britain did not recognize a United States of America. It recognized the independence of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, go right on down to Georgia. They were the sovereign entities recognized. And that is how they saw themselves, as sovereign states. There were the Articles of Confederation. The war had been fought under these articles. They were essentially a coalition of independent states. There was a Congress that met under them, no executive, everything run by committees. One point there was something like 98 committees. No real power to collect taxes, maintain an army. An army was needed. Frontier states like Georgia were threatened from their perspective by Native Americans like the Creek Indians who did not want their land taken away. They were requesting strongly a federal army to help them. The far reaches of Virginia and North Carolina were out of touch with the coastal regions. And some people in those distant regions were negotiating with the Spaniards to enter the Spanish Empire. And the jealousy between the states was such that there were trade barriers between one state and another. All the goods that entered New Jersey had to come through New York Harbor. New York put a tariff on these. And New Jersey, out of spite, then took a lighthouse, which was owned by the state of New York, but was on New Jersey real estate, and taxed it. Such were the feelings that one elderly gentleman left his entire estate to his grandson. He lived in New York, on the condition that his grandson be educated anywhere except at Yale University, because he did not want his grandson to learn the vile customs of the people of Connecticut. So Hamilton, Madison, other thoughtful individuals, including Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, who had been at the Declaration of Independence signing, shrewd man from Connecticut, they began to discuss the need to have this Congress, meeting under the Articles of Confederation, call for a convention to discuss a modification of these Articles of Confederation. All through the winter, Madison wrote to George Washington, "General, you must come. You must preside over this convention. Otherwise, it has no prospect of success." Washington wrote back, "Young Madison, I am not coming. My farm is in ruin. I am sick to death of politics. No good is going to come of this." But finally, once again, patriotic feelings, duty called Washington. And so it was in early May. He got in his carriage, holding his beloved Martha by the hand there at Mount Vernon, and set off. "I am so sick. My stomach is in turmoil. My head is splitting. It's all the strain, dear," she said. "Don't go." "No, I've given my word." It looked as though the very elements were against him. Huge storm blew up. He couldn't cross the river. But finally, that Sunday morning, as he began to reach Philadelphia, he saw a troop of horsemen, their metal helmets glittering, their breastplates glittering, their silver trousers and black coats. It was the Philadelphia Light Horse come out to greet him. And as they escorted him into the city, the bells tolled, the crowds cheered, and his old friend Benjamin Franklin was there to embrace him. The convention was to start on May 11th. Madison had promised Washington it would start at that time. They got to the convention hall, the Philadelphia State House. They sat. Time came, went. Nobody showed up except Washington, Madison, and a few delegates from Philadelphia. Well, young Madison, where is this grand convention that you promised? I don't know. They'll come. Well, they had better. Well, they didn't. 3, 4, 5 days passed. I'm going home, Madison. I've been made to look like a fool. No, please stay, General. And then word began to come. The winds had been contrary. That's how you went most easily, was by sail. The roads were bad. And the delegates began to stream in from 12 of the states. Only Rhode Island refused to have anything to do with this convention. The other states called it Rogue Island, but it liked cheap money, and that's how it wanted to stay. There was also a radical difference in the delegates to this convention. Only 6 men would sign both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Men like Patrick Henry refused to go, although appointed. I smell a rat, he said. They're going to strip us of our liberties. There's nothing wrong with the Articles of Confederation. We fought the war under them, and that is what we fought it for. Limited government, low taxes, the rights of the states. This is going to end up with a constitution with a big government, big taxes, and a federal government that dominates the states. The discussions began. First step was to elect George Washington to preside. The second was to bar the press. Not only was the press barred, the delegates were forbidden to disclose what was spoken about in that meeting. The windows were nailed shut, and soldiers were stationed around the Pennsylvania State House. These men believed in freedom of the press, but they knew they had to have the freedom to discuss responsibly and change their mind when needed. And the issues began. First of all, this was going to be a most difficult task to modify the Articles of Confederation. So from the beginning, the essentially illegal step was taken to abandon that charge and instead to create a new constitution. There was fairly speedy agreement that it would be a representative form of government with a legislative branch, a judiciary, an executive. But then what? First came the question of what kind of representative body are we going to have? 2 or 1? 2 like the British with a House of Commons, 1 and a House of Lords? How many votes would each of the states have? And here the convention almost split wide open because little states like Delaware had 1 vote in the Articles of Confederation, just the same as New York, and they weren't going to give that up. And the little states, New Jersey, Delaware, almost walked out. Then Roger Sherman, self-made man, sat on the board of Yale College, though he could not afford to go there as a boy, went around and just talked to men individually. You know, we've got a little system in Connecticut. Our lower house, which we elect on a very limited terms for the members, is represented on the basis of proportion. So the larger the township, the more taxes it pays, the larger the number of representatives. But our upper house, each township has the same vote. Couldn't we give that a try? And it was solved. And it still works today if we will let it work. Then came the question of the executive. Here there was grave disagreement. Many members were in favor of a single executive, but others worried that a single executive, even one elected for 4 years, and commander-in-chief, would become a Julius Caesar, a dictator. And then, at the dinners, in the evenings, the word began to spread. What if General Washington were the first president? That changes everything. If it is General Washington, I have no concerns whatsoever. He would never abuse his power. Now, don't you wish we had a leader with that kind of moral authority, that we would entrust our freedoms on the sheer belief that he was a man of integrity? And so they began to move rapidly. Now, they did this in one summer. They didn't get started until May 25th, and already by the end of August, they were moving rapidly towards a conclusion. Suddenly came the issue they had all tried to avoid: slavery. There were strong opponents of slavery, men like Elbridge Gerry from Massachusetts, who hated the very idea of slavery. How can we have a constitution to guarantee freedom if we have slaves? Slavery is evil, and this Constitution will be nothing but a compact with the devil if we include slavery. But 7 of the states out of the 12 were slaveholding, including Delaware. They announced very clearly, we will not sign any constitution that does not write slavery in and is guaranteed by that constitution, such as a clause that says if a slave from Georgia escapes to Massachusetts, federal marshals must bring him back to Georgia. That Congress can in no way interfere with the importation of slaves for at least 20 years. Well, that's it. Once again, Roger Sherman, Benjamin Franklin went around. I have never owned a slave in my life, said Roger Sherman, but we have to set our priorities. Do we stand on high moral principles and let this country fall? Or do we set the priority that we must first have a constitution that works? We will never get that constitution unless the slave-holding states come with us. I will not sign such an evil document. And one of these who stood up and said, there must be no slavery, was George Mason of Virginia, who owned more slaves than anybody in the country. Well, the delegates were aghast. He said, no, I understand how evil slavery is. We must make a way now to end it. But finally, this sense of setting priorities, which is so lacking in our Congress today, prevailed. In charge of writing the Constitution, putting together all the articles, was a small committee chaired by Gouverneur Morris, a lively man. He had only one leg, actually. He had lost the other leg jumping out of a lady's bedroom when her husband came home a little too soon. He would then be ambassador to Spain, where he carried on a notorious affair with the Queen of Spain and got thrown out. Finally married a wealthy widow and died operating on himself with a whalebone, sharpened whalebone for urinary blockage. But that was in the future. Here he was, though, still with one leg. And the clear, concise prose of our Constitution, as it's been called by Franklin Roosevelt, the most practical and flexible instrument of government ever devised, owes its clarity to Gouverneur Morris. And so it was written. More debates, more discussion, some changes. George Washington holding his silence all through it, only to moderate. And finally came September the 17th. Some delegates were so furious they had gone home. The whole delegation from New York had gone home. They did not want to see New York put on the same standing with New Jersey. One delegate came back, Alexander Hamilton, alone, representing the New York delegation. There were still strong disputes. Luther Martin, the best lawyer in the United States, but mostly drunk, gave a long and drunken, rambling oration against this Constitution. Elbridge Gerry spoke out against it once more. George Mason refused to sign it and refused to go home. Finally, on that morning of the 17th, frail old Benjamin Franklin rose briefly and said, "May I say just a few words? I'm too feeble, I'm sorry to say, to speak myself, so I've given it to my friend to read to you. I have lived many years. I have learned that nothing human is perfect. Some of you say, go home. Come back with another group next year. We can come up with a better Constitution. We might. But this is the Constitution we have come up with. We have put our wisdom into it. We are not perfect. Let us send it out to our fellow citizens. Let them be the judge. I implore you, please sign it." It was agreed that even if every member there did not sign it, if each of the states there signed it with a majority of their delegates, it could be said that it was unanimous. And one by one, they came up and signed. All through the signing, Benjamin Franklin kept looking at George Washington's chair. And finally, George Washington could not stand it anymore. He got up and he said, "Dr. Franklin, what are you doing?" "I'm looking at your chair, General." "My chair?" "Yes, there's a yellow sun painted on the back of it." "Yes." All through these proceedings, I wondered if that were a rising or a setting sun. And now I am sure that it is a rising sun. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. So they walked out. All sorts of wild rumors had been flying around. They were proclaiming a monarchy and so on. And finally, one little old lady came up to Benjamin Franklin and said, "Well, doctor, do we have a king or a republic?" And he said, "Madam, you have a republic if you can keep it." And so is still the charge today.
The Story of Freedom in America with Dr. J. Rufus Fears is made possible by the generous support of our Freedom and Heritage sponsors. The Story of Freedom in America is a program of the Institute for the American Constitutional Heritage at the University of Oklahoma, in partnership with the Alumni Association of the University of Oklahoma. For more videos and podcasts, visit freedom.ou.edu.